Well, good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, and we are continuing our FBI series. We are now on episode number nine, part nine of this FBI series. And we've been going through a list of questions, trying to answer them. And obviously, uh, this is a sizable series. It's pretty lengthy. And so some of the questions get answered immediately. Some of them we answer in several different episodes, and the answers are spread out. But to date, we've gotten through about, we're dealing with the second or to third batch, or let me put it this way. We're in the final stretch. Let's put it that way. Uh, the first question is, how did the CIA get away with a domestic operation? As we all know, it's illegal for the CIA to operate on domestic soil, and yet Operation Chaos was on domestic soil. ZR Rifle was on domestic soil. MK Ultra was on domestic soil. Mockingbird was on domestic soil. We see the beginning of a lot of domestic operations by the CIA, and that's only possible if the FBI gives them cover. It's the FBI's jurisdiction here domestically. And it's my position that the reason the FBI allowed the CIA to get away with this particular domestic operation, ZR rifles, because they shared the same targets, the same agenda. The agenda was anti-communism and anti-civil rights. And as evidenced by the CIA's later Operation Chaos, which was directly targeting civil rights leaders and anti-war protesters or radicals or communists. Uh, they had the same agenda. The CIA did as the FBI. FBI, going back to COINTELPRO, has been chasing communists and civil rights leaders around forever. So because they share the same agenda, I believe the FBI covered for the CIA. In fact, gave them a wide berth to do ZR rifle, which means the target of ZR rifle, which I believe was JFK, also fits into those same two categories. He was viewed by the deep state as a weak versus communism president, that he couldn't be trusted. He was a national security threat. And of course, he was our first so called civil rights president. So he fits within the same uh, agenda, the same realm. He is wrapped up in one person, a threat to both. Or, he fulfills both agenda items, however you want to say it. So, uh, and that leads me to my second question, is just how did Hoover's personal ambitions, his politics, and his connections contribute to the FBI's institutional motive to participate in the plot in the sense that they immunized everybody? And I start off with the fact that Hoover led the FBI 50 years plus. So the FBI is through and through Hoover. So whatever Hoover thinks, so thinks the FBI. Whoever Hoover's enemies are, the FBI is the same enemies. Whoever Hoover targets, that's who the FBI targets. And in this case, he couldn't stand, from a personal standpoint, he couldn't stand the Kennedys, either one of them, because they were always trying to fire him, to retire him. And he was having to use blackmail and all sorts of means to keep his job. So the CIA has the same enemy. So again, here, this is sort of another answer to question one. CIA is at war with the White House, with Bobby, with Jack. And in a way, so is FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. So not only do they share the same agenda, they share the same enemy. Hoover's personal ambitions were pretty simple: power. He wanted to stay in power as long as possible. And the Kennedys represented an obstacle to that. He had found ways through flattery and through extortion, blackmail, and all sorts of leverage instruments. But he was losing those leverage instruments with Kennedy. For a while it was the philandering, the women. But I think he came to the conclusion that the media didn't care and they weren't going to report it. And the American people kind of didn't care either. And so that was quickly losing its effectiveness. He was always looking for new and better ways to leverage the Kennedys. And of course, he had a personal relationship with LBJ dating back to his Sweet 8F days in Texas. So if you're Hoover, the situation would sit much softer for you if LBJ was president than it does with Kennedy's. I mean, that's your buddy. He's your Sweet 8F buddy, right? All these personal connections he had. And of course, it wasn't just LBJ, it was all the people behind LBJ, all the big oil people, the big military contractors, the political uh, elites down Texas. Uh, there's a lot of people in that Sweet 8F mafia that if Hoover sided with LBJ in this particular situation would help him in his cause, retaining, hanging on to, and actually growing his power base at the FBI. It would help him. If he helped LBJ, these folks, these deep state Sweet 8Fers would help him, So, including all those mafiosos who you remember he had a very tight relationship with. And that included Nixon because Nixon had a relationship with the same people. So he's looking down the road and he's saying, if JFK is removed, LBJ becomes president, and probably the guy after him is going to be Nixon. These are my guys. JFK's not my guy. So from a power perspective, it makes complete sense. Payoff we saw yesterday in episode 8, where LBJ immediately almost appoints an FBI director for life. So all yeah, how's that in the movie JFK, when trying to determine who the suspects or who's responsible, you ask the questions, right? Why was he killed? Who had the power? Uh, who benefited, and who had the power to cover it up? You know, we can go on for days about why JFK was killed, and we can go on for a pretty lengthy time about who benefited. And that's one of the key questions I try to answer when determining who my suspects are. Who immediately benefit? Of course, the Sweet 8Fers did. The oil depletion allowance stayed the same. The Kennedy Act went away, saved him about $300 million a year in the oil business. The Vietnam War was green lighted, which was a CIA war, but all these deep state military contractors got all these big contracts, mostly out of Texas. General Dynamics, Bell Helicopter, Brown and Root Construction. They benefited. LBJ benefited. He got to be the president. He didn't go to jail. Uh, the Secret Service didn't have to protect somebody they didn't respect anymore. It's somebody that they thought was a national security threat. And they didn't have to worry about the civil rights campaign continuing on, because at least not like it had. They hated the fact, I remember I spent a lot of time talking about the Secret Service, about how inundated it was with Southern good old boys. It was the culture. And here you got this Northeast liberal trying to shove civil rights down their throat. Well, that's no longer the case. Now they got a Southern good old boy in presidency again. One of them. And I could just go on and on and on. But anyway, the personal ambitions, the politics, he was far right, anti-communist, anti-civil rights, and his connections, all those Sweet 8Fers, all those mafiosos, uh, that was J. Edgar Hoover's world, which means that's the FBI's world, because J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI, basically created it in the image he wanted it to be. So as goes J. Edgar Hoover, so goes the FBI. Third question was, are there any indications that the FBI had foreknowledge? Yes, we've answered that question. Example after example. Some including their own investigative tactics, the wiretaps, the infiltration, the informants, case after case of warnings from either informants or from just people who called the FBI and gave a warning, or had access to information from a circle of friends that they had, whatever. telexes. I mean, warning after warning after warning. And it was even indicative yesterday in episode 8 where James Hosty came out afterwards and said, "Hey, we knew all along." He was telling Jack Revel in the police garage, "We knew all along this was going to happen. We knew he was here. We knew he's capable of it. He's a communist." And then the Hoover had to do a quick cleanup on aisle 4 on James Hosty, revealing that the FBI indeed had foreknowledge. And up to and including even the fact that it was Oswald, who's an FBI informant, who was killed by Jack Ruby, who's another FBI informant. These are central players in the assassination itself. Next question is, how did the FBI control the narrative out of Dallas? The answer to that's easy. They set the agenda. They set the narrative. It was Hoover. Hoover called Bobby. Hoover wrote a memo. Hoover spoke on the phone to LBJ. Next thing you know, it's coming right out of the White House Situation Room. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And then the assistant attorney general is writing an interoffice memo after Oswald is killed. We got to satisfy the American people that he was the only one. He didn't have any Confederates. There's no conspiracy, and he would have been convicted at a trial. And immediately on the heels of that, LBJ sets up the Warren Commission and uses the exact same language in creating the Warren Commission to drive home the narrative. That's what the purpose of it was. How did the FBI control the investigation after Dallas? And we're looking into that now. Mainly that's through its control of the evidence, which is the next question. How do the FBI handle evidence in the case? We looked at a scenario, a couple scenarios yesterday, which I think illustrates that point really well, or answers that question. Two very key witnesses. You can make an argument they're the most key witnesses in the case. Marina Oswald, Jack Ruby. And you don't get much closer to the alleged assassin than the wife. And look what the FBI did to basically coerce her testimony and be able to predict what she would say. They put her in FBI custody for about 6 weeks, kept her at that hotel, and they threatened her. And they said, if you don't, evidently they felt the need to threaten her because she wasn't initially cooperating. Initially, she was associating them with James Hosty, whom she didn't trust at all. And so she's not playing ball. So they threatened her. And they said, you're not an American citizen. Your kids are. So we could deport you tomorrow. And your kids would stay here and you'd lose your kids. You've already lost your husband. And how'd you like to lose your kids too? And she started to come around. She started to come around. And when she started to do the math in her head, decide to play ball, they dressed her up real nice. Well, first they took her over to H.L. Hunt, his building. We learned that story yesterday. And he met alone with her for about 20 minutes. And after she comes out, she immediately goes on a publicity tour, burying her husband. Just in her broken English, saying that she believed he killed the president, which is exactly the desired result. And after she had proven herself in a couple media interviews, they took her to the Warren Commission, and they knew exactly what she was going to say by that point. They coached her. And I think they bought her off. Anytime H.L. Hunt intersects in any of these situations, it means money. He has no other part to play. He's the paymaster. We saw that with the 70,000 that he sent to Chicago to pay Ruby, the 125,000 he sent to Memphis to pay Percy Foreman to get James Earl Ray to plead guilty. We saw with the 40 grand he sent to L.A. to Sirhan's lawyer to get him to confess. Every time he comes into the case, he's there for a reason. He's paying somebody off. And so when Marina comes in the big FBI car and gets dropped off, she's getting paid off. So it's the carrot and the stick. The FBI used the stick to threaten her, and H.O. Hunt used the carrot to bribe her. And why are we surprised when Marina Oswald comes out and tells the media and then later the Warren Commission that she thought her husband was guilty? So there's an example of how the FBI plays ball. And yes, it appears outside looking in, that Marina testified to the Warren Commission and said what she said, and we should take it at face value. But if you know the backstory, you realize that testimony is garbage in, garbage out. I've said it, I've said it, I've said it, because the FBI coached it. They got her to say what they wanted her to say. The other example was Jack Ruby. And Jack Ruby was such a wild card that Alan Dulles needed to figure out a way to neutralize him before he testified to the Warren Commission. So yesterday we told the story of Jolly West and how Alan Dulles' program, MK Ultra, which he called Ultra because it would be the silver bullet that could be used to get away with just about anything. If you could control people's minds, mind control, their behaviors, get them to do things that they don't want to do against their will, and then have no memory of it afterwards. That's pretty much the aim of MK Ultra. It's the weapon of all weapons, and he knew that. And he picked a specific doctor to go in and meet the psychiatrist, to meet with Ruby before his trial and before the Warren Commission interviewed him. And that was Jolly West. And of course, Jolly West was famous for two things. In the 50s, he had discovered how, and he wrote a paper on it, how to implant false memories into people without their knowledge. And then in the 60s, he had figured out how to create within somebody temporary insanity. Nobody knew at the time that the CIA was dabbling in anything like MK Ultra. It was never intended to be known. We found out about it as a result of an accident. But that didn't happen until the 70s. So at the time, nobody knows Jolly West, who he's working for, who his employer is, what MK Ultra is. They have no idea. He's just a medical doctor, works for different universities and things. He's a contract employee for the CIA working on MK Ultra. Nobody knew that. Least of all the judge, who would have never allowed him to that cell. But Alan Dulles knew. So in he goes. There's no TV, there's no cameras, there's no audio recordings, there's no witnesses. And a couple hours later, he comes out and announces to the whole free world that Ruby has had a psychotic break with reality. He's no longer fit to stand trial, yada, yada, yada. And sure enough, he wasn't. In the trial, convicted him, and he ends up with a death sentence. Now, it all gets thrown out later, but for the purposes of his trial, to keep him quiet, Alan Dulles was able to sneak his doctor in there and work his magic. Even a doctor later, when the judge said, "I want a second opinion," the next doctor came in and said, "The only way this is possible is through some kind of toxic introduction of some kind of psychotic drugs." And he's like, "I don't know how that would be possible in a secure jail cell." It turns out it wasn't so secure. So right on the heels of the trial comes the Warren Commission to take his testimony. And of course, this was intentional. They destroyed the witness, which means they destroyed the evidence. By the time the Warren Commission went down there and took Ruby's testimony, Ruby was a babbling idiot. Temporary insanity. And they come out and announce, "Hey, we tried. We came down here, took his testimony, and his testimony is worthless." So in both cases, you see how the FBI in the Marina Oswald corrupted Marina Oswald's testimony, which means they maneuvered her around, manipulation of evidence. And then you see how the CIA did the same with Jack Ruby. Both end up testifying to the Warren Commission, but it's garbage in, garbage out. The Warren Commission, if I don't accomplish anything else as a result of this series, take our FBI, because the FBI handled all the evidence and forwarded it to the Warren Commission. If I don't accomplish anything else, I hope you understand that the Warren Commission is not worth the paper it's written on. To quote it for any purpose or any reason, to quote any of the Warren commissioners for any purpose, for any reason, to back up anything is, to me, not even credible. The whole thing was a sham from start to finish. It's not worth the paper it's written on. The third witness that they, remember the third way that the FBI would corrupt the testimony going in, this evidence going into the Warren Commission, is they just suppress it altogether. Remember the story of James Leon Simmons? He says, I saw the puff of smoke. I heard the shots. We ran around behind. We saw the footprints. And Mark Lane asked him, did you tell that to the Dallas police? Yeah. Did you tell it to the FBI? Yeah. Did you ever get called to testify by the Warren Commission? No. And of course, the Warren Commission would only call to testify the witnesses that the FBI said they needed to call to testify. So the FBI made a decision. We learned yesterday that they completely altered the testimony or the evidence of Julia Ann Mercer. They turned it around. They said, well, she couldn't identify Jack Ruby on the knoll the day before the assassination. She says later, when she reads it for the first time, she says, that's completely wrong. I told him I could identify. I knew exactly who it was. After I saw him shoot Oswald, I knew exactly who that was. I put two and two together. So they just altered her testimony and forged her signature. Garbage in, garbage out. Today, we're going to look at another question. How were FBI loose ends dealt with? We're going to be starting to look at that. And we saw some indicators yesterday. We talked about Guy Banister and how within 90 days of his arrest, he dies of a blood clot, and they come in and take his files. And we also learned yesterday what payoffs were only possible with FBI complicity in the conspiracy. The biggest payoff was J. Edgar Hoover getting a job for life. And that only happens if there's a change at the top. JFK was never going to appoint him FBI director for life. One of the first things LBJ did. You scratch my back, I'll scratch you. You help me become president, get out of this legal jam I'm in. I'll help you stay in your job that you want. It's interesting how people who research this sometimes want to ascribe to these conspirators larger than life motives, when in reality, it's the same motives you and I have for pretty much everything we do. We want to keep our jobs. We want to have a nice life. We want to have revenge against our enemies. I mean, let's just get right down to it. It's the same. These are human beings. J. Edgar Hoover was a human being. LBJ was a human being. They have the same base motives we do. LBJ would like to become president someday. It's been his lifelong goal. He would also like to stay out of jail. And if he has to do X, Y, and Z to achieve that, so be it. He's already demonstrated in his past he's willing to kill people. So it's not much of a thing for him. Who cares? J. Edgar Hoover, he wants to stay in his job. He's used blackmail, extortion, flattery. He's used all kinds of leverage instruments to keep. It's not working anymore. He's running out of bullets. So if he has to cover for the CIA, if he has to shape the evidence, manipulate, maneuver, all these things, if he has to, monkey around with the investigation after, so be it. So be it. Last question is, how did FBI begin losing control of the narrative? Now, we're not to that point yet, but we will be getting there. Today, we're going to be looking a lot at evidence because I want to show you what the FBI is revealing. A lot of this came out subsequent, but a lot of it came out almost immediately. Like, for example, when Henry Wade, the DA down in Dallas, got up and gave that famous press conference and gave 15 reasons why he thought Oswald, even though he was dead, if there had been a trial, he would have been convicted. Of course, we've already learned about Wade and how he ran a fixer to the Dallas police and fixed all these cases. And it was only discovered after his death why he had such a high conviction rate. Turns out he's fixing all these cases. And the orders come down from the Attorney General's office, Assistant Attorney General. We got to satisfy the American people. Even though Oswald's gone, there won't be a trial. That if there had been a trial, he'd be found guilty. We need to lay this to rest, right? Because American people, some of them got suspicious after Oswald was killed by Ruby, especially those in Dallas, because they knew who Ruby was. He was mobbed up. Then here comes the Warren Commission. They're going to try to convince us he wasn't. And it starts to smell like a cover-up. So here's what the FBI is telling everyone who will listen, this is what comes out. Warren Commission, and Henry Wade refers to some of it, references some of it. I've highlighted, this is all per the FBI. So remember now what the FBI's objective is, and that's to hang all this around the neck of Lee Harvey Oswald. I think I've demonstrated that they've had plenty of foreknowledge this was going to happen. They allowed it to happen. In some cases, they helped it along. They've known all along somebody was using Oswald's name, impersonating him, using his birth certificate, etc. They already know that the CIA is lying about the Mexico City story, trying to incriminate Oswald. They know it's clear Oswald's being set up. They know that internally. But they're going to participate in, we've already seen where they've, according to the mortician, they came in, put his dead hand on the rifle, and instantly announced they have a palm print on the rifle, which heretofore they couldn't find any fingerprints on, the palm prints. So as we go through this, please keep in mind that the FBI is not to be trusted on any of this. And we're going to later show how all this evidence falls apart and would have fallen apart in a trial. But as I mentioned prior, when you witness a trial, when the prosecution gets finished with its case, it almost always looks pretty bad for the defendant. And it's not until the defense attorney stands up and starts making his case that the questions start coming. That's when you find out if the evidence is rock solid or not. Because the defense attorney's job is to create doubt, question. And the way that you do that is you pick apart the evidence. And we'll have our chance to pick apart the evidence. But here is the prosecution's case. Okay. Per FBI, they said 2 bullet fragments were found in the front seat of the limo. And according to their tests, those bullets fragments were found to have been fired through the barrel of the Mannlicher Carcano. So they're tying the bullets they found in the front seat to the Mannlicher. They said the Mannlicher fired those bullets. Second, per FBI, the bullet that they found on the stretcher, so-called magic bullet at Parkland Hospital, was also fired to the barrel of the Mannlicher Carcano. So there's your 3 shots. Remember, it can only be 3 shots because it's a bolt-action rifle, and with the time constriction, it's only time for 3 shots. So there's your 3 shots. 2 bullet fragments in the front seat, 1 found at the stretcher, boom, open and shot. All fired through the Mannlicher Carcano, according to the FBI. Third, per the FBI, radiation tests performed independently by Dr. Vincent Gwynn, remember that name, it's going to come up again, confirmed that all the lead bullet fragments, the 2 in the front seat, the 1 at Parkland Hospital, all the lead bullet fragments, including what they found in the president's brain, came from the same bullets that were fired by the Mannlicher Carcano. So in other words, every bit of lead that Dr. Vincent Gwynn tested came from either the 2 fragments in the front seat or the magic bullet at Parkland. And when he tested the bullet fragments in the president's brain, according to his test, it came from one of those 3 bullets. So they're tying everything to 3 bullets and the Mannlicher. All right. Per the FBI, all 3 shell casings found near the sniper's nest on the floor there were fired from the Mannlicher Carcano, meaning boom, 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 he let the shell casings fall. Now, this is where logic doesn't make sense. Why would the assassin then jump up and go take the effort and the time to hide the gun and run and flee the scene, but leave 3 shell casings on the floor at his feet? All right, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Anyway, they said all 3 shell casings found near the 6th floor sniper's nest were fired from. Okay, they're tying now the location of where the shots came from. They've got the lid in the car and the Parkland Hospital stretcher all come from the Mannlicher. Now they're saying the Mannlicher was fired from the sixth floor because they found the shell casings at the sixth floor sniper's nest. So now they know the location of the shooting. Per the autopsy report, which we all know the autopsy report was the autopsy itself. Again, another sham. There's no qualification that Humes and Boggs had. Roswell, the two doctors had to carry out a medical exam or an autopsy of a bullet of someone who died as a result of a bullet. They'd never done one before, but that wasn't the point. They wanted somebody military who had to follow orders, chain of command, and find what they told them to find. So garbage in, garbage out. Here comes the autopsy report. Total garbage. We already know this. This is widely accepted, by the way. I'm not speaking out of turn here. The angle of the second shot, which is the magic bullet, was between 45 and 60 degrees, which is consistent with the trajectory of a shot from the sixth floor. So they have the sixth floor because they have the shell casings. Now they're saying the angle of the magic bullet matches that trajectory. So it's a way to back up their case that all the shots came from the sixth floor. Per the FBI, Governor Connolly's right wrist had bullet fragments matching the magic bullet. So they're saying it was the second shot that hit Connolly, which is, by the way, we learned yesterday in that conversation in the Oval Office between Hoover and LBJ. They're having this conversation back and forth. And LBJ asked him, was the shooter, were they trying to hit Kennedy 3 times? And Hoover said, yes. Well, why didn't he hit him 3 times? Well, because Connolly was in the way, the one, and that second shot hit Connolly instead of Kennedy. Now, of course, that brings up the question, well, how is that possible? If Connolly was in front of Kennedy, that means the shot had to come from in front. It opens up a whole new field of inquiry, right? But as far as this is concerned, it does, Hoover is confirming that the first and third shots hit Kennedy. The second shot missed him because it hit Connolly. And here he's, per the FBI, Connolly's right wrist was hit by the magic bullet, which is the second shot. All right. Continuing on. Now we get to the Tippit scene. Per the FBI, 438 shell casings found on the scene, which of course, remember the witnesses never saw any shell casings. And these shell casings you see here were supposedly initialed by the police officer who found them. JMP, JM Poe. And of course, the Warren Commission exhibit. None of those shell casings had those initials on them. So I have such a hard time not getting ahead of myself. All right, so per the FBI, 438 shell casings found on the scene of J.D. Tippit murder scene were fired from Oswald's 38. All right, now they're tying the Tippit murder to Oswald. Per the FBI, the shell casings from the 38 revolver were Winchesters and Remingtons. All right. Per the FBI, the bullets in Tippit's body were Winchesters and Remingtons. Right? Looks pretty ironclad, right? Per the FBI, the bullets in Oswald's 38 were Winchesters and Remingtons. So you see what they've done here? They said the shell casings belonged to his gun. The shell casings were Winchester and Remington. The bullets they found in Tippit were Winchester and Remingtons. And the bullets, when they found after they arrested, were also Winchester and Remington. So therefore, it was Oswald who killed Tippit. By the way, this is all being announced when the Warren Commission releases its report. So September 27, 64. Per the FBI, the handwriting on the order forms for the Mannlicher Carcano on the 38, which they found in Oswald's custody. I think they found him in Ruth Payne's garage. I'm not positive about that. Anyway, they found him 2 order forms. They confirmed that the handwriting was the handwriting of Oswald. Per the FBI, the handwriting on the receipts of purchase. He didn't have a personal mail box, so he had a post office box. So when he received these packages, They verified the handwriting, and it was him. Per the FBI, the A. Heidel, which all these order forms, he didn't use his own name. He used his alias, A. Heidel, Alec Heidel. A. Heidel on the order forms receipts, the P.O. box was confirmed to be Oswald's alias by the second ID in his wallet at the time of his arrest. And lastly, per FBI, the backyard picture of Oswald Sr. in the Life magazine cover was taken and was taken by Marina. It was confirmed to be authentic. Of course, this was a very incriminating photo of him holding allegedly both murder weapons, one in his left hand, the other on his right hip, and communist literature in his right hand, posing in the backyard, a famous backyard photo. And then regarding the gun and the sniper's nest, per the FBI, they found a palm print on the Mannlicher Carcano. But of course they did. Per the FBI, they found a fingerprint on the trigger guard of the Mannlicher Carcano. Per the FBI, Oswald's palm print was on a box in the 6th floor sniper's nest. You see there arrows to where they found the fingerprints and the palm prints. And then per the FBI, a paraffin test on Oswald's right hand was positive, indicating that he had fired a pistol, a revolver that day. Notice what they don't say about the paraffin test. I'll get to that. A few more things. Per the FBI, Oswald was in the Texas School Book Depository seconds after the shooting. All right. Nobody's disputing that. He was seen there by two people, at least two. Marion Baker, the Dallas police officer, and Roy Truly, Texas School Book Depository superintendent. You saw him in the 2nd floor break room. Per the FBI, Marina Oswald testified that Oswald confessed to her that he had attempted to assassinate General Edwin Walker in Dallas on April 10th, 1963, which is interesting because this is important to sort of establish the fact that he's capable of assassination. And it's interesting, this piece of evidence, this photo, this is the back of what General Edwin Walker's house looked like in 1963. I've been to that site. It's gone. They built a new house in its place. Kind of sits a little bit off the road a little bit. There's a little bit of a driveway going up to it. And in this very important piece of evidence, this photo was taken seconds after the shooting or at the time of the shooting. You know, notice what's been cut out of the back of the car, the picture. They cut out the license plate. That was not Edwin Walker's car. And been a lot of speculation as to why the evidence was monkeyed with like this, and someone intentionally cut out the license plate of the car. There was also a witness on the scene who disputed the fact that the shooter was Oswald. When they saw a picture of Oswald, they said, no, that's not the guy. Anyway, anything you get from Marina, remember, is the result of 6 weeks of coaching by the FBI. Remember that. And then per FBI, Oswald was a self-confessed Marxist. I mean, anyone knows that. He said it all the time. So that's not news. Okay, now I want to introduce all that evidence to you because at some point as we proceed further along, a lot of this evidence is going to be accepted. You know, there is no trial because Oswald died. So it's just a report. And it stands for years, which is why I'm not going to rebut it immediately because this is a chronology. You know, when we get to the point where new evidence emerges that rebuts that testimony, it's after 10 years where it's had time to harden in the minds and consciousness of the American people. It's made its way into the history books. It's become accepted fact. Newspaper articles, books. I mean, what's that old saying? A lie goes around the world 7 times before the truth gets out of town. It takes time, especially when you get the full weight of the government fighting researchers or investigators or investigations or district attorneys or lawyers, whatever, who's trying to get to the truth. They're using every tool in their tool chest to stop it. But the truth cannot be stopped. Eventually, it bubbles to the surface. What's interesting is in the immediate aftermath, everything went against Oswald. But as time went on and continues on to this day, decades later, all the new evidence exonerates him. None of the new evidence implicates him. It all exonerates him, and it actually implicates the people that were pointing the finger at him to begin with. FBI, CIA, Warren Commission, et cetera, government. October 5, 1966. There's Jack Ruby, and he's been convicted, and he's been sentenced to death. And a Texas appeals court has now overturned his conviction and ordered a retrial with the condition that this time Ruby talk. Now, remember, in the first trial, Ruby couldn't talk, or if he had, he wouldn't have made any sense anyway. Jolly West had worked his magic on him. But this time, he agrees to talk. Some time has gone by. Remember, the insanity that Jolly West imposed upon him, or caused, was temporary. So you figure that was 2 years ago, and 2.5 years ago. So now he is of sound mind and body, which now represents a greater threat to the narrative than ever, because time has gone by. Ruby's had time to marinate in jail, thinking he was going to be executed, and his insanity is worn off. And now he can testify, and there's no guarantee. You know, in the heat of the moment, he just gotten $70,000, probably got all his debts erased for his nightclub. And in the heat of the moment, he's probably stronger and willing to keep quiet. Probably more afraid too, because what could happen if he didn't. And now a couple of years later, prison does things to you, and you might be a little bit more willing to talk now. And you can remember, you're thinking clearly now, and you know and so this represents a clear and present danger to the narrative and to the conspiracy. Clearly, the new trial was ordered for February 67. So that's only a few months away. It's not a long period of time. October to February, it's not a long period of time. So whatever happens with Ruby better happen quick. And no doubt, they're not going to let Jolly West in to talk to him again. Not this time. So something else is going to have to happen as far as Ruby's concerned. Think about Guy Banister for a second. What happened to him? He was arrested, and 90 days later, he died of a blood clot. And everybody thought, it's natural causes. But what we find out in the 70s that the CIA had developed all kinds of tactics to kill people, make it look like natural causes. And included in that list of natural cause deaths, cancer, heart disease, heart attacks, coronary thrombosis, or blood clots. And that's what Guy Banister died of. And what they do immediately after, FBI went in and took all his files. Because he was going to be tried. There was going to be a trial, and no one knew what Guy Banister was going to say. And he knew everything. Now here we have another situation. Jack Ruby is going to be tried, and he knows everything. So I think you know where this is headed. Before we get to that, though, December 14th, 1966, we start to see another front open in New Orleans that represents a clear and present danger to the conspiracy, to the conspirators. to the narrative, and that is when New Orleans DA Jim Garrison decides to reopen the case. Now, you remember 3 years prior, he had interviewed Jack Martin, he had interviewed David Ferrie, and he was prepared to go forward, but the FBI intervened and said there was nothing to the evidence that Jim Garrison alleged against David Ferrie. They released Ferrie with a public apology, undercut Garrison in the DA's office, and Garrison dropped it. He himself was a former FBI man, and he respected the FBI. But in the interim, he'd had some conversations with people, and he'd read the Warren report, and he realized what a sham that was. And so 3 years later, he decides to reopen the case. And he goes back to Jack Martin, who by this point is a very nervous Jack Martin. This is 3 years after the fact. He's already told the story, so all Jim Garrison needs to do is kind of confirm it. And Martin is just, it's like pulling teeth to get him to confirm anything. But, he met with him and met with him and met with him. And he slowly pried from Martin the reason that Banister assaulted him, which he already knew, but he's going to have him testify, so he needs to get him to say it to him first. And of course, Martin is also able to confirm all the other nefarious goings on in that Newman building the summer of '63 that involved Guy Banister, who is now dead, so they can't go after him, David Ferrie, who's still alive, Oswald, who's dead, can't go after him, a bunch of anti-Castro Cubans, Clay Shaw, who's a very influential man in New Orleans, kind of a financier kind of guy, ran the International Trade Mart, which is right down the street on Canal there. And that's where a lot of the leafleting that Oswald did was in front of the International Trade Mart. Anyway, he found out that Clay Shaw was the money man paying it. And he found out that Clay Shaw was CIA. Now, Clay Shaw's going to deny it. The CIA is going to deny it, but it came out years later. So he's thinking that this is a CIA conspiracy being run out of the Newman building. He already knows Operation Mongoose being run out of the Newman building is CIA. So why would it be surprised that Clay Shaw would be involved in what's going on at the Newman building? He's CIA. He's the CIA's man in New Orleans. And of course, Guy Banister's former FBI. They're surrounded by all these intelligence operations there in New Orleans, FBI, Secret Service, customs officials, CIA, everybody. They're all around him. And yet they're able to operate unfettered, Operation Mongoose and everything else that was coming out of that building. And so he decides, like an onion, he's going to start with Clay Shaw, go after him, and then try to peel the onion and get to the people behind Clay Shaw. He knows Clay Shaw is just a front in New Orleans. He represents something much bigger. He gets Delphine Roberts, the old secretary, used to have an affair with Guy Banister. She comes in, he gets her testimony. And the combination of Delphine Roberts' testimony and Jack Martin's story becomes the genesis of this whole Clay Shaw trial a year later, which he alleges was where the conspiracy to assassinate JFK was run out of. It was born in New Orleans, and it was carried out in Dallas. What's that old saying? Don't poop where you eat, right, or sleep. So they did all the planning in New Orleans, they carried out in Dallas. So we get back to Ruby now, because we're following the chronology here. This is January. Remember, the trial was the old conviction was thrown out in October. The new trial was supposed to be in February. January 3, 1967, Ruby dies a month before his retrial. He'd been diagnosed with cancer in December, never had any physical issues prior. All of a sudden, he gets cancer, and exactly 28 days after his diagnosis, he dies. Now, that may not mean much to many of you who are watching this, but in my other channel, which is entitled Standards Plus History Academy. I do several episodes on the Medical Manhattan Project, which was taking place in New Orleans. This was a bioweapon research project. It was happening in New Orleans in the summer of '63. It's the it's one of the jobs Oswald was involved in. It's how he met Judith Ferrie, and it was happening in David Ferrie's homes. He had two homes on Louisiana Avenue, one house where they stored all the mice that were going to be used in the testing, later the monkeys, and the other house where they did all the injections and did sort of the science. And then it would all end up down at the infectious disease lab where Dr. Mary Sherman would zap it all with this huge piece of equipment called the linear particle accelerator and zap all this radiation into these mice, and later these monkeys that had been injected with the polio vaccine, which had SV40 in it, which is cancer. What they're trying to do is induce cancer in these mice that would kill them in 28 days, and then do it in monkeys, and then eventually try it on humans. It was supposed to be, it was advertised as an assassination or a bioweapon to kill Fidel Castro. You could get those cancer cells into his body through an injection, a poison dart, or even in his food. And you could kill him. And it would look like natural causes, cancer. They finished this project, and they would inject into the mice. They get these big tumors on. They cut the tumors off. They dump them in a blender, mix them up, send the cancer soup, what they called it, down to Dr. Mary Sherman. She zaps it with this linear particle accelerator. Comes back. Now it's more lethal. Inject it in the next round of mice. Tumors grow bigger, faster. Cut them off and throw them in the blender, blend them up, send the cancer soup back to Mary Sherman. She injects it. They just keep doing it until they're killing the mice in 28 days. There's pictures in David Ferrie's home of mice with tumors so big, they're bigger than the mice themselves. The mice can't even, they're trying to drag them around. Then they eventually do it with the monkeys. And when they're killing the monkeys in 28 days, they went through the marmosets and the rhesus monkeys and the African greens till they get to the next step is the human test. And they have to go over to, they get these 3 prisoners from Angola. They're on death row and they volunteer for some medical experiment. They inject them and they die. And Judith Ferrie was sort of handled during that whole summer by Oswald. She's this young girl that has this, she's this sort of a savant when it comes to cancer research. She never graduated from college, hadn't even attended medical school yet, but she had all this knowledge testing our own homemade lab back in Florida. And so she gets recruited in this project by Dr. Ochsner, the preeminent cancer research doctor in America at the time. But she's this young girl. She's in this big city all by herself. So Oswald handles her. They end up falling in love. There's another story there. But she's the one that sort of, it's not just her. She tells the story in depth and detail, what her role in this whole thing was. And they picked her particularly because she didn't have a trail, right? She'd never published anything. She had no degrees. So she was like invisible. And afterwards, they totally intended to get rid of her. They're going to use her. And she had all the knowledge of someone who did have the credentials, of someone who did have the degrees, of someone who had published. She just didn't have any of that baggage. So they're going to use her. Oswald was supposed to take care of her that summer, and he did. They got cover jobs at Riley Coffee together. And it's a long story, but the point is they created this bioweapon that would kill a human being in 28 days. They succeeded. And they used the polio vaccine, which the government knew in advance had SV40 in it. And they were simultaneously doing 2 things. They were trying to find a cure or some sort of vaccination to stop a cancer outbreak, which was going to happen in 30 years. This polio vaccine was introduced in the mid-50s with the sugar cube. They knew that with a 30-year hibernation period, they wouldn't have a cancer outbreak until the mid-'80s. But in the mid-'80s, we were fixing to face a cancer outbreak unlike anything we'd ever seen, unless in that 30-year period we could come up with a vaccine, have it ready and waiting for that moment. So they were simultaneously working on a cure for cancer with this vaccine, but at the same time, the CIA figured, hey, why not take what we know is lethal, this cancer drug, this virus, and let's weaponize it. Let's intensify it. Let's create these galloping cancer cells that we can introduce into enemies of ours. And voila, we've got a tool to kill people, make it look like natural causes. Now you say, well, where's Ruby coming in all this? Well, in that summer of 63, Ruby made a trip from New Orleans to Dallas. I'm sorry, from Dallas to New Orleans to buy a showgirl. Her name was Jada. She was going to be she was the it girl. And of course, if you're going to buy a showgirl in New Orleans, you have to go through Carlos Marcello. He owned her, the mob boss there. So he met with Carlos Marcello. And he knew Oswald. He and Oswald were spotted at times. They were together several times in Dallas. Publicly, people saw him at the Carousel Club. They saw him at the B&B restaurant, where the waitress said she waited on him. There are several occasions that people publicly saw Oswald and Ruby together. So they knew each other. So when Ruby came to New Orleans and Oswald was in New Orleans, he came to David Ferrie's place to see what Oswald was up to. And Oswald brought him into lab number 2, where Judith Ferrie was. And Judith Ferrie tells the story how she met somebody named Sparky Rubenstein. That was his nickname, Sparky. And Rubenstein was his real name, but he was a Jew. He shortened it to Ruby. And Oswald introduces Ruby to Judith and says, a friend of mine, tell him what we're doing. And so she went through the whole, what I just did with you. Of course, it was more in depth. Took him through the whole process and said it's a bioweapon to create a cancer drug. It's a bioweapon project to create a cancer drug, a virus that will kill somebody in 28 days. So Ruby was fully apprised of what Oswald and the government was up to in New Orleans, and that they had succeeded ultimately in creating this, because of course Oswald in the fall, after the Mexico City trip, ends up back in Dallas and tells Ruby that the project had succeeded. They had done their tests on the humans. They killed all 3 of them. And it puts a whole new spin, by the way, on Oswald's trip to Mexico City, because he thought he was going to Mexico City. He did go to Mexico City. He thought he was going with a thermos full of this bioweapon to hand off to a contact to sneak into Cuba that they could use to kill Castro. That's why the CIA went to such lengths. They had 2 purposes: to hide or cover for Oswald's real purpose of going to Mexico City. Obviously, they cannot allow the story of this bioweapon project to ever reach the light of day, because it's damning in several ways. First of all, that they're involved in a bioweapon project to begin with, to assassinate people using a virus that makes it look like they died of natural causes. That's going to call into question all sorts of suspicious deaths, right? Secondly, people are going to eventually want to know how they came up with this virus to begin with. Where did it come from? No one wants the public to know that it came from the polio vaccine, right? I mean, that would be controversial. So that there was a cancer drug in the polio vaccine, that would be extremely controversial. So they got to hide that. And of course, in the second reason that is convenient is that they could show that he was actually meeting with Kostakov, this Russian KGB expert on assassination. They could show that he was premeditating the assassination. He was being ordered to do it by the Soviets and the Cubans. And if they show that he's meeting with the Cubans trying to arrange an escape hatch after the assassination, it will provide proof of premeditation and proof that Cuba was behind the whole thing, or the Soviets, and justify a war against Cuba. So there are a lot of reasons to hide the real reason Oswald went to Mexico City, and then invent a new reason to incriminate him and the Soviets. We heard about this all from Richard Nagel, and even Hoover knew the truth about Mexico City after he listened to the voice recordings and saw the images that the CIA producing. He knew it was bullshit. So anyway, the point of this is that Ruby knew this whole bioweapon project, what it was about, what it was for, what it could accomplish. It's one of the reasons he told the Warren Commission back in 64 when they came and interviewed him. One of the only lucid things he said, of course, they thought he was crazy. He said, "You got to take me to Washington, get me out of here. They're going to kill me here." And they thought he's crazy. You're in a secure jail setting. Why would you be afraid for your life? He said, they're going to kill me with cancer. They're going to give me cancer. And they were like, "You're nuts." This was said instant amongst all the other crazy things he said. So it was easy for the Warren Commission to just brush it off. Anyway, he told Dallas Deputy Sheriff Al Maddox that he had been treated for a cold in that December period. And when he went in to get treated for the cold, they gave him an injection. And soon after, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he told the deputy sheriff, he says, "Well, they injected me for a cold, but really, I know it was cancer cells." And again, that still hasn't become common knowledge. I mean, the fact that the CIA had developed means by which it could kill people and make it look like natural causes, we found that out in the mid-70s. But as far as that bioweapon project in New Orleans, that has still been pretty successfully contained to this day. There's a good book, it's called Dr. Mary's Monkey. And it's written by a guy whose dad was a prominent medical, he was in the medical field of some kind there in New Orleans during this whole period. And it was like a big secret in New Orleans what was going on at the where Dr. Mary Sherman was operating out of that kind of abandoned health, Department of Health facility, and the linear particle accelerator and the cancer project, basically. He wrote a really good book about it. I can't remember the guy's name, but the name of the book is Dr. Mary's Monkey. And it's a phenomenal book. Of course, it's corroborated by what Judith Ferrie wrote, her book, Me and Lee, which tells the whole story of what was going on that summer in 63. But of course, all the experts have so-called debunked Judith Ferrie and this guy, Dr. Mary's Monkeys, the author. I can't remember his name. Dadgummit. Anyway, so as to sort of continue to hide what was really going on in New Orleans that summer. So you have to see, here's another case where just like Guy Banister, who was not a threat until he was arrested, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a trial. Now they don't know what he's going to say. 90 days later, he dies of a blood clot. Jack Ruby was a threat at his trial and what his first trial and what he's ever going to say to the Warren Commission. So they sent Dr. Jolly West to crazy him up. And they thought the threat had passed. Then this appeals court judge throws out his conviction, orders a new trial. So now all of a sudden, he's a threat again because he's going to have a new trial. And this time he's promising to talk. So in December, they say, "Well, you've got a cold. Here, let's give you this injection for this cold." He suspected it was cancer. And sure enough, 28 days later, he dies of cancer, which fits perfectly within the purview or the parameters of that project, that bioweapon, what it was designed to do. Silence somebody like Jack Ruby. Tying up loose ends. But they have other loose ends because of what Jim Garrison is doing in New Orleans. And the biggest one is David Ferrie, because David Ferrie was operating out of that Newman building too. So you think about who the cast of characters in that Newman building so far. It was always Guy Banister, Oh, at the top it was Clay Shaw, and now he is going to be the subject of this trial. And then you got Guy Bannister, he's dead. You had Oswald, he's dead. You have Ferrie, he's still alive, and he's going to be a witness in this trial. You have Jack Martin, he's scared to death, but he's testifying, or he's given the scoop, the story to Jim Garrison. Those are your main characters. Oh, you have Delphine Roberts, right? She's the secretary. She really doesn't know anything about the inner workings, but she can verify who was there and things of that nature. And you have all these Cubans, but they're not going after these Cubans. The Cubans are useful instruments. They're going after the people that are running this thing. And they're trying to get back, at least Garrison, he's trying to use Clay Shaw as an instrument to get to the higher ups because he knows Clay Shaw is CIA. So if you're CIA, you take orders. So Clay Shaw was taking orders from somebody. On February 17th, one of the things Garrison's trying to do is keep it quiet. He didn't want the public to know. He didn't want the media to know because he knew it would create this circus. And he tried. But what happened was his office got infiltrated by folks who knew what he was doing, and they leaked it. And on February 17, 1967, the New Orleans States item breaks the story. This is a big story about Jim Garrison investigating the JFK assassination from 3 years prior. And they identified David Ferrie as the star witness. And Ferrie calls Garrison. He's hiding out in a hotel somewhere, and he's hysterical. You know what this means? I'm a dead man. That's what he's saying. These photos here. This is a top picture is of Ferrie being carried out of his house after you'll see here in a minute what happens to him. This is the house. I've been to this house. It still looks pretty much the same. Down the street and across on the other side was his other house. But this was this was where the injections happened for that Medical Manhattan project. This is where Judith Ferrie, Oswald, they'd all go in the back entrance. They didn't go in the front like you see here. They go in the back. His apartment was upstairs. And that's where all the injections were happening. But this is where he was found dead as well. So let's see, February. So that article came out on the 17th. 5 days later, is when Ferrie dies. So he makes the prediction on the 17th because of the article, and it only took 5 days for him to die. But before we get to his death, just a little backstory about David Ferrie and his involvement. According to Robert Morrow was a senior CIA agent beginning in 1960. So he's in the CIA. He wrote a book in 92 called First-Hand Knowledge. And according to him, he was contacted on July 1st, 1963 by Tracy Barnes. Tracy Barnes is the CIA head of domestic operations officer, which is ironic. I've always wondered about that. I thought the CIA wasn't allowed to operate domestically. Here you have a head of domestic operations officer. Huh, interesting. Anyway, Barnes called Murrow and said, I need you to purchase this is July of 63. I need you to purchase 4 Mannlicher Carcano 7.35 millimeter surplus rifles. And then he said, when you get these rifles, I need you to alter the 4-piece of each rifle so that the rifles can be dismantled, hidden, and reassembled quickly. We're going to use these in a clandestine operation. Now, here's the thing, the background about the Mannlicher Carcano. It's like the world's worst shoulder rifle. In World War II, the Italians called it the humanitarian rifle because it was notoriously inaccurate. So it saved a lot of people's lives because you'd shoot at somebody trying to kill them, and it wouldn't kill them because it wouldn't hit them. It was a cheap piece of crap. And so he thought that was interesting because everybody knew the Mannlicher was a bad rifle. Why are we going to use this in a clandestine operation? The world's worst shoulder rifle in a clandestine operation. But, it's an order, so he did it. Then he gets a second phone call a day later. So this would be July 2nd, 1963. This one was from Eladio del Valle, whom we're going to talk about in a minute. Also CIA, obviously Cuban. And it said, I also need, in addition to these 4 Mannlichers, I need 4 undetectable transceivers used for communication purposes. So it looks to Robert Murrow, as if he's buying 4 guns for 4 shooters, and he's ordering 4 transceivers to be used by these 4 shooters who are shooting with these 4 guns. It's all being used in this clandestine operation, of which he doesn't know what the clandestine operation is. He's just saying this was what happened. And then Del Valle said, when you get all that together, the transceivers and the rifles, delivery should be made to David Ferrie in New Orleans. So this is just a portion of the knowledge that David Ferrie has, right? That could be spilled in a trial with Jim Garrison in New Orleans in 1967. This is just a small portion. This doesn't have anything to do with the Newman building necessarily. Everything that's going on there with Guy Banister and Oswald, the training out at Lake Pontchartrain, and the medical Manhattan project that he's hiding in his homes. I mean, there's a lot that David Ferrie, and the CIA knows it. This guy represents, as I said, a clear and present danger. So sure enough, 5 days after he predicted this is what's going to happen, Ferrie is found dead in his house. 2 suicide notes are discovered. 2. They rule it an aneurysm. And then after they find the suicide notes, they change it to suicide. And these are some pictures of the body as they found it. Interesting. Ferrie suffered from a severe case of hypertension, which means his heart races, which is why they played him in that role in the JFK movie. He was sort of a tense, high-strung individual, according to witnesses. And they found next to his bedstand an empty open bottle of Proloid, which is a medicine that you give to somebody who has a low thyroid, a thyroid condition where you have a low metabolism. It speeds everything up. Now, they didn't test for it, of course, but according to doctors, I've heard several doctors speak on this who say that just a few Proloid pills to someone who suffers from hypertension, much less an entire bottle, but just a few would kill somebody. I mean, it would literally explode your heart. So there's that theory. There's also the theory, and I'm not vouching for this, I'm just saying what I heard him say, and it is incredibly interesting. So you can take it for what it's worth. James Files, who is a self-described hitman for the Chicago crime family. He had all kinds of military experience, served in Vietnam. When he got back, he was recruited by the Chicago outfit by Charles Nicoletti, whom we know was at Dealey Plaza on the day of the assassination. According to Charles Summers, he saw him through the window. He was in the records building. We know Charles Nicoletti was there. Files claims to have been there. We don't know for sure. Speculation back and forth on that. But we know Charles Nicoletti was there. We know that Files was trained by the CIA, and he subsequently trained a lot of the Cuban brigade that went to the Bay of Pigs in 61. And we know that he met Oswald, the first time he met him was in Clinton, Louisiana in 1962. Clinton, Louisiana ends up being kind of an interesting town in this whole saga because witnesses said they saw Oswald, Shaw, and Ferrie in Clinton in the fall of 63. And Oswald jumped in a line to register to vote, and Ferrie was on the phone. Clay Shaw was driving with his big fancy black car. And boy, the government moved heaven and earth to try to expunge that whole story. I mean, that puts Ferrie, Oswald, and Shaw to get together, number one. Number two, the obvious question is what were they doing in Clinton? According to Judith Ferrie, that was cover for where they were really going, which was Jackson, Louisiana, where they were going to meet the prisoners and give them the fatal doses of the bioweapon. And they had to establish cover for the trips. They stopped in Louisiana. Oswald inquired about a voting or registering to vote, but also a job, which, according to a barber and a local congressperson, he talked to him directly about this job, and they both referred him on to this this hospital, this mental hospital in Jackson, that he could get a job. It's all cover for why they were really going. It was that bioweapon. Anyway, according to files, he first met Clinton or Oswald in Clinton, Louisiana in 1962. So I've been to Clinton. You can't get there from here. You have to want to go to Clinton, is my point. So it's not like, oh, I just saw him on the side of the interstate. You know, we bumped into each other at the same gas station on the interstate or something. No, if you're in Clinton, it's because you intended to go to Clinton. And so that's interesting. Files tells the story about how he was in Dallas in fall 63, November, the day of the assassination. That he, again, was taken around town by Oswald, who was showing him the sights and taking him to a place where he could fire his weapon, all this stuff. Again, I'm not vouching for the story. I don't know what I believe about the Files story. I'm just including this because it's an interesting factoid about what happened to David Ferrie and how he died. It was never tested. David Ferrie's body, the autopsy, they were not testing his body for proloid, but according to witnesses, there was an empty bottle there, and him having hypertension, that's a deadly combination. But then you have this alternate explanation. According to files, quote, David Ferrie died of a cerebral brain hemorrhage that was brought on. He said there was a tissue tear and the brain itself was just above the palate of the mouth. The hemorrhage was inflicted on him with a nail file. A nail file gives you the simulation of a tear. With a fingernail file, you got a smooth edge and a perforated edge. And when it goes through the tissue, it's like a tear. It's like something ripping apart. Who killed David Ferrie? I'm not saying. And the interviewer says, but you know? And Files says, yes, I know who it was. Yeah. So what Files is saying is that David Ferrie was killed. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't an aneurysm. He was killed with a nail file up through the roof of his mouth where they sliced open uh, the just above the palate of the mouth. I don't know how that works. This is an assassination technique that he had learned in the CIA, and through the word of mouth, the people that he knew, the sources that he had, that's how David Ferrie was killed. So whether it was proloid or it was a nail file, it seems, especially when you consider the timing and the context, having Ferrie terrified that he was going to be killed. Now it was public that he was the star witness in this trial. 5 days later, he's dead. And of course, isn't it convenient? Again, we've seen it so many times in the past where these people's deaths are all ruled as suicides. 2 suicide notes. Who writes 2 suicide notes? Anyway, that's not the only threat to this conspiracy, to the narrative. Jim Garrison has another witness, and his name is Eladio del Valle. If you remember, Eladio del Valle is the guy who called, according to Robert Murrow, on the phone, said, I need the 4 transceivers. And when you're done, you got the guns and the transceivers, send them all to David Ferrie. I'll get them from David Ferrie. So he's the other star witness. On the same day that David Ferrie is suicided. Eladio del Valle is murdered in Miami. He was tortured, this is according to Miami police, shot in the heart, point blank range, and his skull was split open with an axe. He died hours after David Ferrie died. And of course, his murder's never been solved. So here we go, tying up loose ends. The threats, we learned yesterday, Guy Banister was a threat. 90 days later, he's dead of a blood clot. Then we learned today Jack Ruby becomes a threat when he gets a new trial. He's diagnosed with cancer in December, 28 days, dies of cancer. Now we have these two threats to testify in this Jim Garrison murder, the JFK assassination conspiracy trial. And on the same day, they're both taken out. David Ferrie by suicide with the empty bottle of proloid or the nail file, whichever it is. And then this guy was flat out murdered, gangland style. It's never been solved. So in one fell swoop, Jim Garrison loses his two-star witnesses. So there's been a lot of accusations against Garrison that he was a glory hound, that he would brought this case to further his political career, and that he was kind of a lone ranger, unilaterally making all these decisions. And I wanted to show that on March 1st, 1967, that's not the case. That is not the case at all. He brought the evidence to a grand jury, the evidence that he had, now minus his two-star witnesses, and he still has enough evidence to indict Clay Shaw for his role in the conspiracy that involved Shaw, Ferrie, Banister, Oswald, the CIA. But again, his main target here is not Shaw. It's a means to an end. He wants to get to the CIA. So he gets this indictment from the grand jury, but the old saying is you can indict a ham sandwich. Any competent DA can get an indictment. So in New Orleans, the way he wanted to run this to authenticate and give credibility to what he was doing, he took the evidence that he had in this indictment, he took it before a 3-judge panel. He said, all right, now I've got the indictment. Here's my evidence. Here's my case. Now you guys tell me, you 3 judges, is there enough to indict, to uphold this indictment? Should I proceed? So this goes to the fact that Garrison is not out there on a jihad by himself. And they uphold the indictment unanimously, stating, quote, there is probable cause to believe that Clay Shaw had participated in a criminal conspiracy to assassinate JFK. So after that, after filtering his evidence, think about the whole context here. He had this evidence 3 years ago. Well, based on the FBI say-so, he declined. Now there's been new evidence, and he's now got these star witnesses who aren't going to make it. But he's got all this new evidence, so he decides to pursue it, but he takes the evidence to the grand jury indicts, he takes the indictment to the 3-judge panel, the 3-judge panel upholds the indictment unanimously. And so now he makes the arrest of Clay Shaw, and we're going to have a trial. And that means the threat's not gone, right? The threat to the narrative, the threat to the conspiracy, the threat to the conspirators is not gone. And so they're going to have to continue rat fucking Jim Garrison in the DA's office to the extent that they can. And when I say they, you'll see who I'm talking about in the future episode. But to discredit, to sabotage the whole trial, because it is the biggest threat yet to this whole plot. You got to think there was no trial of Oswald. So no threat, no trial, no threat. There's been no trial. Now we're getting to the late 60s, and all of a sudden there's going to be a trial. And so they're going to throw everything they got, the kitchen sink, to prevent the exposing of this plot. And of course, Jim Garrison is the big threat. So they're going to use whatever means at their disposal to disable that threat. We'll get to that later. But June of 67, Ed Hoffman tries again. Remember, he's the guy that tried and tried. He went to Dallas police, he went to the FBI, wrote a letter, wrote down everything he saw. No one would take him serious. He's the deaf guy. And he saw the suit man and the train man behind the fence. He saw the puff of smoke. He saw the suit man toss the rifle to train man. He broke it down, threw it in a case, walked off in one direction. Suit man walked off in the other. He's tried to tell everybody who will listen that story, and no one will listen to him. So he, in 67, 4 years after the fact, he goes back to the FBI. And so agents checked out his story, and in the process, they interviewed his father. And his father said, "We don't want any part of this. Ed's on his own on this. We don't want any part of this as a family." And they reported, or they documented, quote, "The father of Virgil Hoffman, Ed Virgil Hoffman, stated that he did not believe that his son had seen anything of value and doubted he had observed any men running from the Texas School Book Depository, and for this reason had not mentioned it to the FBI." Interesting when you read that. It says he doubted he had observed any men running from the Texas School Book Depository building. Ed Hoffman never said he saw men running from the Texas School Book Depository. He said he saw men behind the picket fence. And then after the puff of smoke, the suit man ran towards the train man, threw him his weapon. Train man broke it down, walked off in one direction. The suit man walked off. That's what he said. And the father is misrepresenting it, or the FBI is misrepresenting what the father said. I don't know which. I don't believe either, because I know what Ed Hoffman testified and consistently said for years, over and over and over again. The same story I just told you. Train man, suit man, gun, One FBI agent noted in his report that Frederick Hoffman, the dad, had told Ed Hoffman, the son, to keep quiet about what he had seen, or, quote, "You might get killed." So I bring this up again to say again that the FBI did not pursue the story. It almost looks like they took what Ed Hoffman's daddy said and said, okay, well, daddy doesn't agree with the son, even though we're noting in our report that dad's worried about what might happen if he does tell a story. That might be motive why he's fudging the facts a little bit. That might be motive why he doesn't want to pursue the story a little bit. He's afraid. And who can blame him? By 67, people have been dropping like flies, witnesses. So because of the fear of the dad, who's fudging the facts, because of the fear of the father, the FBI drops it. Ed Hoffman, you cannot blame him. It gets so frustrating to me when I hear people say, if this was a conspiracy, people would have talked. Ed Hoffman tried to talk. How many times? And no one would listen to him. He went to DPD several times. He went to the FBI several times. And then after a few years pass, he goes back to the FBI and gives them another chance. And no one will pursue the story or investigate it. And of course, who's in charge of all this? In the aftermath, it was the FBI. But in 67, it's the FBI again, because he goes specifically to the FBI. Okay. So that is today's episode. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to like my channel or subscribe, comment, share, whatever. Until next time, God bless. Have a great day.